Claire Morgan pressed her forehead against the chilled glass of the airplane window, watching Paris emerge like a dream below, gray rooftops, winding streets, the glint of the Seine. She had promised herself that this trip was about freedom, about leaving behind the ashes of a relationship that had burned her hollow. Yet, as the wheels touched down, a hollow ache stirred inside her chest. The terminal buzzed with voices and languages she barely understood. She clutched her worn leather journal to her chest, as if it were armor. Inside its pages, she had written the same sentence the night before, "I will start again." Her first hours in the city passed in a blur. Taxi drivers calling out, the dizzying roundabout at Place de la Concorde, the sudden shock of seeing the Eiffel Tower glittering in the distance. Paris was everything the movies had promised, and yet the loneliness pressed close. She ordered coffee in broken French at a cafe near the Latin Quarter, fumbling over the words. The waiter smiled politely, but his eyes carried no warmth. She was just another tourist passing through. Still, she tried to breathe it in. The clatter of porcelain cups, the perfume of strangers drifting by, the hum of a city alive with history. She opened her journal, pressing her pen to the page. Paris feels like another world. Maybe here I can leave him behind. Her thoughts drifted back to Mark, the man she had loved for 4 years. His betrayal had been quiet but devastating, a slow erosion of trust until the day she found the messages that confirmed everything. His voice still echoed in her mind, pleading, defensive, cruel in a way only someone who once loved you could be. She shook her head, pushing the memory away. Paris wasn't about him. The cafe door swung open, and cold air rushed in. She glanced up, almost without meaning to, and saw him. A tall man, coat draped loosely over broad shoulders, his dark hair damp from the drizzle outside. His eyes swept the room briefly before settling on a corner table. Something about him, an unstudied confidence, the quiet way he moved, made her pulse quicken. He sat down, ordered in fluent French, and leaned back as though he belonged to the place itself. Claire looked away quickly, chastising herself. She hadn't come here to notice men. She had come to heal. "Excuse me." The waiter was back with her coffee. Claire thanked him softly, her voice small against the cafe's noise. When she lifted her cup, her hand trembled. She wasn't sure why. Outside, the rain had begun to fall, tracing silver streaks down the glass. She watched as strangers hurried by, umbrellas bobbing like restless birds. For a fleeting second, her reflection overlapped with the man's in the window. Their eyes almost met, though separated by glass and chance. She snapped her journal shut, scribbling one final line before leaving. Every beginning carries shadows. Gathering her things, she stepped out into the Paris night. The drizzle kissed her cheeks, and the air smelled of rain and tobacco smoke. Somewhere behind her, the man lingered at his table, his gaze following the movement of people on the street. Claire didn't notice. Her boots tapped against the cobblestones as she walked back toward her small rented apartment. She felt both lighter and strangely unsettled, as though she had brushed against a story not yet written. When she closed the door behind her, the silence was loud. She curled onto the bed, pen in hand, and wrote until exhaustion pulled her under. She dreamed of laughter, of dark eyes watching her from across a crowded room. And in the morning, that same stranger would no longer be just a shadow. Morning light spilled through thin curtains, painting Claire's room in soft gold. She woke with a vague memory of last night's dream, eyes following her across a cafe, the sensation of being noticed. Shrugging it off, she tucked her journal into her bag and decided to wander aimlessly through Paris. That, she told herself, was how one found the city's heart. Not in guidebooks, but in accidents. Her steps carried her to the narrow streets of Montmartre. Painters had already set up easels, sketching tourists and selling watercolors. Claire paused, letting her gaze drift from one canvas to another, until a particular voice, low and accented, pulled her attention. "You're watching too carefully," the man said, his tone more observation than tease. Claire turned. It was him, the stranger from the cafe. Up close, his presence was disarming. Dark hair curled slightly at his collar, his clothes worn yet stylish in a careless way. But it was his eyes, storm gray, sharp, alive, that unsettled her most. I wasn't, she stammered. He smiled, slow and deliberate, like a curtain lifting. Everyone watches. Not everyone admits it. On his easel, half-finished strokes suggested the beginnings of a portrait. Claire tilted her head, curious. Are you an artist? A shrug. I try. My name is Étienne Rousseau. Claire, she offered, extending a hand. His grip was firm but lingered longer than polite, a spark flickering there. They walked together along the cobblestones, their conversation flowing with surprising ease. Étienne spoke of painting not as a career but as survival, how colors were his language when words failed. Claire admitted she wrote, though she avoided calling herself a writer. The vulnerability in her confession seemed to please him. You write to understand yourself, Étienne said. I paint to forget myself. The word struck her, lodged in her chest like something dangerous but irresistible. Hours blurred as he showed her his favorite corners of Montmartre, a quiet stairway tucked between ivy-covered walls, a bakery where he insisted she try warm pain or chocolate, a square where accordion music drifted lazily in the afternoon air. Still, beneath his charm, something shifted. When she mentioned she was traveling alone, his expression darkened briefly. Alone, he repeated. It isn't safe. Men will see you, and he cut himself off, shaking his head, forcing another smile. But perhaps Paris looks after those who deserve it. Claire laughed lightly, though unease pricked at her skin. His attention felt flattering, intoxicating even, but intense in a way that pressed too close. As dusk approached, they sat at a small cafe table. Étienne lit a cigarette, watching her through the smoke. You have the look of someone running, he said softly. Claire's chest tightened. And what makes you think that? He leaned closer. Because I see it in your eyes. People who are whole don't stare at strangers like they're searching for answers. The words stole her breath. No one, not even her closest friends, had said it so plainly. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but instead she whispered, Maybe you're right. Étienne's smile returned, slow and knowing. Then stay. Let me show you Paris. Not the Paris of tourists, but mine. She hesitated only a moment before nodding. His confidence, his intensity, his strange ability to read her, it pulled her in against her better judgment. When they parted that evening, he kissed her hand, lips brushing lightly against her skin. It felt old-fashioned, dangerous, thrilling. Back in her room, Claire opened her journal with shaking fingers. She wrote furiously, I met him again, Étienne Rousseau. He sees too much. I should be careful, but something in me doesn't want to be. She closed the book, pressing it to her chest. Through the window, Paris glowed with night, but her mind replayed his smile, the shadow in his eyes, and the way his words had pierced her like a blade wrapped in silk. She had no way of knowing then. What began as chance would soon blur into obsession. Claire told herself she wasn't falling too quickly. That was the lie she repeated each morning as she brushed her hair, laced her boots, and found Étienne waiting with a half-smile that made her forget caution. Their days blurred into an intoxicating rhythm. Museums, narrow streets, cheap wine that tasted sweeter simply because he poured it. Nights became his studio, where canvases leaned half-finished against cracked walls, their colors wild and unrestrained. At first, it felt like liberation. Étienne painted with an intensity that electrified the room, and when he looked at her, she felt like she too was a canvas, stretched open, revealing, remade. Yet there were shadows even in that brightness. He began asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. Why did you leave America? His voice was casual, but his eyes sharpened with a question. Vacation, she replied, laughing it off. He didn't laugh. No, not vacation. You're hiding. Claire shifted, reaching for her glass. Maybe I just needed a change. His hand covered hers, firm. Change from what? A man? A mistake. She froze. It was as if he could see through her. She forced a smile. Does it matter? Étienne's mouth curved, though not kindly. Everything matters. That night, she wrote nothing in her journal. Days later, he snapped at a waiter who had smiled at her too long, his voice low and sharp, like a blade slipping free. "Don't look at her," he muttered in French, his grip tightening on her arm until she winced. A second later, he was apologizing, kissing her wrist as if his affection could erase the bruise. The pattern repeated itself. Darkness followed by tenderness. A sudden storm in his eyes, then a quiet morning with croissants, laughter, and a painting he claimed was inspired by her. Claire told herself passion was messy, that intensity was proof of depth, but unease crept through her like a chill draft under a locked door. One evening, her phone buzzed with an American number. "Emily." She hesitated before answering. "Claire? Oh, thank God. I thought you'd gone off the grid." Emily's voice rushed through the line. "You've barely texted. Is everything okay?" Claire swallowed, glancing toward Étienne, who was smoking by the window, his back turned. "I'm fine. Just busy." "Busy? With what?" "With someone," Claire admitted. "His name is Étienne. He's different." Emily's sigh was heavy. "Different how?" "Good different, or the kind that makes you forget who you are." Claire pressed the phone tighter to her ear. "Both, maybe." "Claire," Emily's voice softened. "Be careful. You sound like you're underwater. I don't want you drowning there." A rustle. Étienne turned, watching her, smoke curling around his face. His eyes narrowed, questioning. Claire forced a smile, pretending calm. "I'll call you later. M. Promise." She ended the call quickly. Étienne asked nothing, but the silence felt weighted. That night, his passion was almost violent, as though he were proving ownership. Claire clung to him, half in fear, half in desire, unable to separate the two anymore. The days kept sliding forward. They stood on bridges at night, the city glittering around them, and he whispered promises that sounded like vows. Yet behind every word lurked a shadow, something she couldn't name but felt tightening around her. In her journal, she scribbled in the dark, "He is both light and shadow. I don't know which I love or which will destroy me." Claire closed the book quickly, as though the words themselves might betray her. And outside her window, the streets of Paris seemed quieter than usual, as if the city too was holding its breath. Claire awoke to the sound of rain tapping against the studio skylight. Étienne was already up, bare-chested, smudges of paint on his skin, as though even his body had become another canvas. He worked in silence, brush moving quickly. Colors slashed across the easel. She admired him, but something gnawed at her, a memory of his tightening grip at the cafe, the sharp edge of his jealousy. She opened her mouth to ask where he had been the night before, but the question tangled on her tongue. Instead, she offered coffee, watching him accept without meeting her eyes. Later that afternoon, while Étienne argued with supplier over the phone, Claire wandered into a nearby gallery. The air was hushed, heavy with varnish and old wood. She traced her fingers along the frame of a painting when a voice, cool and lilting, broke the stillness. "So, you're the American." Claire turned sharply. A woman stood a few feet away, elegant, striking, her hair pinned in a loose chignon. Her lipstick was the kind of red that left an impression long after the wearer was gone. "I'm sorry," Claire asked. The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Étienne has a type, it seems. Naive. Romantic." Claire stiffened. "I don't know who you are." "Camille Duval," the woman replied smoothly. "I was with Étienne for 3 years. Longer than anyone else has survived him." Claire's stomach nodded. "Ex." Camille laughed, sharp and bitter. "If that's what he told you, he doesn't let people go." "Not really." Before Claire could respond, Camille stepped closer, her perfume musky, intoxicating. "I should warn you, he loves like fire. Beautiful, yes, but fire always consumes." The words clung to Claire even after Camille disappeared into the rain-soaked street. When Étienne found her later, he noticed her silence. "What happened?" he asked, reaching for her hand. "I met her," Claire said quietly. His expression hardened. "Who?" "Camille. She said she was with you." Étienne exhaled sharply, dragging his hand through his hair. "Camille is nothing. She refuses to let go, but she has no place in my life now." Claire searched his face. She didn't sound like nothing. "She lies," He snapped, then softer. He caught her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. Do not listen to her. You are mine, Claire, not hers, not anyone's. The words should have reassured her, yet they tightened around her like a rope. That night, their passion burned hotter, edged with desperation. Étienne kissed her fiercely, almost angrily, as though proving something neither of them dared name. When he finally collapsed beside her, asleep, Claire lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling. Camille's voice replayed in her mind. Fire always consumes. Days later, Claire glimpsed Camille again across a crowded street. Their eyes locked, and Camille gave a small, knowing shake of her head, as though pitying her. Claire wanted to believe Étienne's words, to surrender to his promises, but doubt had already rooted deep inside her. She tried to distract herself, wandering markets with Étienne, sipping wine along the Seine, but the unease lingered. His temper grew sharper, flaring when she asked harmless questions. He apologized quickly afterward, with flowers, with paint-stained hands clutching hers, but the apologies felt rehearsed. In her journal, Claire wrote, "Love is supposed to feel safe. Why does mine feel like a secret I shouldn't be keeping?" She closed the book before he could see, and though she didn't know it yet, Camille's warning had not been a jealous woman's spite. It had been a prophecy. Claire tried to shake Camille's words, but they clung like smoke. Each time Étienne touched her, his hand on the small of her back, his lips brushing hers, she wondered if it was tenderness or possession. Paris, once intoxicating, now felt like a maze where every turn led back to him. Her journal bore the weight of truths she couldn't say aloud. I feel like I'm losing myself. He says he loves me, but it feels like a cage. I can't breathe when he looks at me that way. She wrote late at night, pages stained with smudged ink where her hand shook. Étienne's control had become subtle but constant. He wanted to know where she was at every moment. Demanded she answer immediately when he called. Grew cold if she laughed too long with a stranger. Once, when she returned late from a bookstore, his jaw tightened. Were you alone? His voice was deceptively calm. Yes, she said quickly. Don't lie to me, Claire. I know how men look at you. I'm not lying. His silence afterward was worse than shouting, icy, punishing. The next morning, he brought flowers, set them on the table, and kissed her cheek as though nothing had happened. But the bruise lingered, not on her skin, but in her chest. One evening, overwhelmed, Claire slipped out while Étienne painted. She wandered until she found herself in a quiet bar tucked off a narrow street. The room smelled of old wood and tobacco, the hum of jazz drifting from a speaker. She ordered wine, her French clumsy. The bartender, a man in his late 30s with kind eyes, studied her as he poured. American? Claire nodded. Is it that obvious? He smiled faintly. The accent and the loneliness. She stiffened. I'm not lonely. His gaze softened. If you say so. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen without being devoured. He introduced himself, Mark. They spoke little, but his quiet presence steadied her. When she rose to leave, he added gently, Come back any time. Some people need a place where they can breathe. She walked home with the words echoing inside her, a place to breathe. But Étienne noticed her absence. He stood at the door when she arrived, arms crossed, paint staining his fingers. Where were you? A bar, just for a drink. With who? No one. Just myself. He stepped closer, eyes narrowing. Don't lie. I can smell the smoke. Who was there? Claire's pulse raced. It was just a bartender. That's all. His jaw clenched. For a moment she thought he might strike her, but instead he laughed bitterly, turning away. A bartender. Of course. She retreated to her journal that night, whispering her fears onto the page. I'm being watched. Even when I'm alone, I feel him near me. Maybe Camille was right. Maybe I'm already burning. Her handwriting faltered, jagged and desperate. In bed, Étienne curled against her, murmuring apologies she didn't believe. His hand traced her arm possessively. She stared at the ceiling, forcing herself not to cry. And for the first time since arriving in Paris, she wondered if she would ever truly leave. Claire lay awake long after Étienne's breathing settled into sleep. The room was dark, but her thoughts glowed feverishly. Escape. The word frightened her as much as it comforted her. Could she actually do it? Could she leave Paris, leave him, before the shadows swallowed her whole? Thousands of miles away, in New York, Emily was pacing her apartment. Claire's silence gnawed at her. For weeks, their calls had dwindled into short, hurried conversations. Claire's voice always laced with distraction. Tonight, Emily tried again. The phone rang, and rang. No answer. She left a message, her voice firm but edged with fear. "Claire, it's me. Please call back. I don't know what's happening over there, but I'm worried. Just don't shut me out." Back in Paris. Claire's phone buzzed where it lay in her bag, muffled beneath a scarf. She didn't hear it over the sound of her own pulse. Étienne had grown more watchful lately, his silences heavier, his touch more demanding. She knew he would question every word if he saw Emily's name flash across the screen. The next evening, unable to bear the suffocation, Claire slipped back to Mark's bar. He noticed the way her shoulders hunched, the way her eyes darted as if someone might be following. He poured her a glass of wine and leaned in, lowering his voice. "You shouldn't come here too often," he said. Her heart jolted. "Why not?" "Because someone like him will notice." Claire froze. "You don't even know him." "I don't have to," Mark replied softly. "I see it in you. Fear leaves marks, even if they're not on the skin." Tears pricked her eyes. She turned her face away, ashamed. "I can't live like this." "Then don't," he said simply. "Leave." The word, spoken so plainly, made her chest ache. She wanted to believe it was that easy. But Étienne's world had closed in around her like the walls of an ornate prison. He knew her schedule, her friends, or what few she had left. He even held her passport in a drawer for safekeeping. Still, that night, Claire made a decision. She would leave quietly. She would take only what she could carry, slip away while he painted, and vanish into the noise of Paris. The plan was fragile, but it was hope. Yet Étienne, as though attuned to the tremor of her resolve, began watching her more closely. When she returned home, he asked questions that sounded casual but cut deep. "You were out again?" "Yes, just walking." "Alone?" Her throat tightened. "Yes." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You should be careful. Paris can be dangerous." That night, as he brushed her hair with a tenderness that felt rehearsed, she thought of Emily, her friends' laughter, the safe warmth of New York cafes, the freedom of speaking without fear. Emily would tell her to run, to take the first train, the first plane, anything. But the distance between thought and action felt like a chasm. Emily tried again the next day. The call went straight to voicemail. She cursed softly, then typed a long email, her fingers striking the keys with urgency. "Claire, if you're in trouble, just say the word. I'll come. I don't care what it takes." The message sat unread. Meanwhile, Claire tucked her journal into her bag, its pages heavy with secrets. She glanced at Étienne painting, his brush moving in deliberate strokes. His gaze flicked to her, sharp, knowing. "Going somewhere?" he asked lightly. Her hand froze on the strap of her bag. "No, just to the market." He smiled again, that same too-perfect curve of lips. "Good. I'd hate to think you were keeping things from me." Claire forced a nod, but inside dread bloomed. Somehow, he already sensed her fear. And fear, she realized, was the one thing she could no longer hide. The studio door creaked open, swallowing Claire in the scent of turpentine, paint, and something darker beneath. Something metallic, faint, but sharp enough to sting her senses. Étienne stood at the center of the room, bathed in lamplight. His shirt was streaked with color, his face a mask of calm, his eyes burning with something that looked nothing like love. "Claire," he said softly, as if greeting her after long absence. "Come. Tonight, I want to paint you." Her pulse faltered. Every nerve screamed, "Don't go in." But his smile pulled at her like a tide. She stepped inside, each footfall echoing. He closed the door behind her, the lock clicking too loudly. She forced a laugh. "You've already painted me before." "Not like this," Étienne murmured, reaching for her hand, his grip firm, almost bruising. "Tonight, you will give me everything." He guided her to the chair by the easel, draping a scarlet cloth around her shoulders. The color bled against her pale skin, too vivid, too final. He stepped back, studying her, brush trembling in his hand. "You've been distracted," he said suddenly, his voice breaking the stillness. Claire's breath hitched. "I've just been tired. Paris is overwhelming." "You lie." His brush clattered onto the floor. He crossed the room in 2 strides, seizing her chin between his fingers. His eyes were wild now, glassy with rage. "You've thought of leaving me. Don't deny it." Her throat dried. "Étienne, please. You think I don't see? The way you hide your phone. The way you whisper into it when you think I sleep? Do you think I'm blind?" His voice cracked like a whip. Claire shook her head, tears spilling. "I wasn't." "Stop," he roared, slamming his fist against the canvas behind her. The half-finished painting tore, the frame splintering. "Do not make me the fool." She trembled in the chair, paralyzed between fight and flight. "You're hurting me." Étienne's chest heaved, then stilled. He knelt before her suddenly, his tone dropping into a frightening tenderness. "Forgive me. I can't lose you. You are mine, Claire. Mine." The switch in him was dizzying. His hand slid from her chin to her shoulders, almost caressing, though the grip never softened. She could smell the wine on his breath, the fever in his skin. "Do you understand?" he whispered. Her silence only fueled him. He kissed her with a violence that left her breathless, desperate. She turned her face away, sobbing now. "Don't cry," he crooned. "This is love. The world doesn't understand, but we do. Only we." Claire's heart hammered. Somewhere in the chaos of her fear, survival sparked. She tried to push him back, but his body pressed heavier, pinning her to the chair. Her voice cracked as she screamed. "Stop. Please stop." Étienne's face twisted, anguish and fury merging. "If I can't have you, no one will." His hand clamped over her mouth, stifling her sobs. The lamplight threw monstrous shadows across the walls, his silhouette bending over hers, larger than life, larger than mercy. The studio filled with sound of struggle, a chair scraping, glass shattering, her muffled cries tearing through the air. Outside, Paris pulsing differently. Lovers walking, cars honking, music drifting from cafes. While inside, the night collapsing on itself. "Claire." Étienne's voice cracked, half pleading, half commanding. "Why do you fight me? I love you." Her eyes were wild, pleading. For Emily, for Mark, for anyone, for a chance to breathe. In those final moments, every ounce of resistance erupted. She kicked, shoved, her screams breaking free for an instant. A sound so raw it rattled the rafters of the old studio. But his hands silenced her again. The lamplight flickered, then steadied. The crimson cloth slipped from her shoulders to the floor like spilled blood. And the city, eternal and blind, kept breathing beyond the studio walls. Morning sunlight spilled across Montmartre, washing cobblestone streets in gold. Tourists climbed the steps toward Sacré-Cœur, cameras dangling, laughter floating in the air. The city carried on as though nights never held monsters. At the edge of a quiet alley, near a line of overflowing bins, a young couple stopped. The man pointed. "Regard, what's that?" It was a suitcase, large and battered, its leather edges frayed. At first it seemed ordinary, until the woman noticed a stain, dark, crusted, seeping through the seams. A metallic odor lingered, wrong, sour in the fresh morning air. Her face paled. "We should call someone." Within an hour, the alley was sealed off, police tape fluttering like yellow ribbons in the breeze. A small crowd gathered, phones raised, whispers growing louder. Detective Luc Moreau pushed through the bystanders, his coat flapping, cigarette smoldering between his fingers. He was 54, his face etched with lines carved by years of chasing death across the city. Paris never stopped surprising him, but always disappointed. "Tu es con A?" he asked an officer. The young man gestured to the suitcase, his voice trembling. "Sir, it's bad." Moreau exhaled, dropping the cigarette and crushing it beneath his boot. He approached slowly, the odor intensifying with each step. A forensic technician crouched beside the case, latex gloves tugged tight. With a nod from Moreau, the technician unzipped it. The sound was small, ordinary, a zipper's rasp, but what spilled out was anything but. Inside lay Claire Morgan. Her body was folded, contorted to fit the suitcase's confines. Her skin was pallid, marked by bruises that told of struggle. Strands of blonde hair clung to her face, matted with dried blood. For a moment, the alley fell silent. One of the officers turned away to vomit. Another muttered a prayer. Moreau stood frozen, jaw tightening. In all his years, he had seen bodies dragged from rivers, burned in abandoned cars, left to rot in basements. But there was something about this, the indignity, the brutality of a suitcase. She had been reduced to luggage, a possession discarded. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. The tourists who had found the case sobbed softly, clinging to one another. Forensic photographers moved in, cameras flashing, capturing every grim angle. The alley echoed with clicks that felt sacrilegious. "Identification?" Moreau asked. "American passport inside." An officer replied, voice subdued. "Claire Morgan, 27. American, young, alone in Paris." Moreau's chest sank. He imagined her walking these same streets days earlier, alive, her eyes catching the same morning light now falling across her broken form. "Cover her," he ordered quietly. "She deserves dignity now, at least." As a sheet was drawn over the suitcase, Moreau pulled out his notebook. His mind clicked into gear, past the horror, into method. Who was she with? Where had she stayed? Who would miss her? Every answer was a thread, and every thread, he knew, would lead him into a darkness where obsession festered. Nearby, a journalist had already arrived, shouting questions. "Is it true a woman's body was found? Do you have suspects?" Moreau glared. Not today. But Paris had ears. By evening, the city would buzz. The American tourist. The suitcase. Montmartre. He lit another cigarette, the smoke curling upward like a ghost. He thought of his own daughter, barely older than Claire. His heart tightened, an ache buried beneath years of hardened habit. "Find me everything," he told his team. Friends, acquaintances, lovers. Someone did this, and someone thought they could hide it. The suitcase sat silent, surrounded by flashing cameras and curious eyes, but screamed louder than any witness. As Moreau turned away, he already felt the weight of the case pressing on him. Paris had handed him another tragedy. Now it demanded justice. And somewhere in the city, he knew, the killer was watching the news, waiting, perhaps even smiling. Detective Luc Moreau sat in his cramped office. Claire Morgan's passport and blood-stained journal spread across his desk. Outside, Paris pulsed with indifference, but inside the walls of the police station, her voice lingered on every page. The journal was neat at first, sketches of cafes, notes about museums, little fragments of hope. But as the entries grew darker, so did her handwriting. The lines slanted, letters pressed hard into the paper as though she had been carving instead of writing. "He watches me always. I can't breathe without him asking where I've been. I'm afraid, but I can't let go." Moreau exhaled, rubbing his temples. He had read these kinds of words before, usually after it was too late. Claire had been crying for help in ink. Now her whispers came only from the pages of a book soaked in tragedy. The station doors opened. Emily Hastings entered, pale from the transatlantic flight, her eyes rimmed red. She clutched her bag as though it were a lifeline. When she saw Moreau, she faltered. "You're the detective?" she asked in English. "Yes." His voice was steady but gentler than usual. "You must be Emily." She nodded, tears brimming. "She's really—" Moreau's silence was answer enough. Emily crumpled into the chair across from him, burying her face in her hands. He gave her a moment. "I tried calling her," Emily whispered hoarsely. She never answered. "I knew something was wrong. I knew it." Moreau slid the journal toward her. She wrote about him. A man, Étienne Rousseau. Emily's head snapped up. That's the name. She mentioned him on the phone once. Said he was intense, brilliant, but different. I begged her to be careful. Moreau jotted notes quickly. Each puzzle piece sharpened the picture. Later that evening, Mark was brought in. He looked uneasy under the station's harsh lights, his bartender's hands twitching against the table. "I tried to warn her," he admitted. "She came into my bar, looking broken, told me she felt trapped. I told her to leave. Buddy, he always found her. Did she ever say he hurt her physically?" Moreau pressed. Mark hesitated. "Not with bruises. But sometimes that's worse." He was in her head, controlling her every move. The testimony aligned perfectly with the journal, Emily's words, and the fragments of Claire's final messages on her phone. A picture emerged, a woman drawn into a storm of obsession, fighting to escape but tethered by fear. Emily stared at the evidence spread across the table. Photos, notes, Mark's statement. "She was alive in those pages," she said softly. "And she knew he would kill her." Moreau nodded grimly. "And now we find him." Outside, Paris was draped in night. Sirens cut through the darkness. Headlights flashed across wet streets. Moreau lit a cigarette, watching the smoke curl against the ceiling. Cases like this carved scars into him. But he carried them all. In the silence, Claire's words echoed again. "I'm afraid, but I can't let go." For Moreau, the dead spoke through paper, through testimony, through the grief of those left behind. And their whispers never lied. He closed the journal with finality. "Bring Rousseau in," he told his team. Emily lifted her head, eyes burning through her tears. "Make him answer for what he did to her." Moreau met her gaze. "He will." The hunt was no longer just for justice. It was for Claire's voice, silence in life, but demanding truth in death. And somewhere in the city, Étienne Rousseau had no idea that the walls were closing in. The morning sky over Paris was gray when officers surrounded the crumbling apartment building in Belleville. Neighbors leaned out of windows as Étienne Rousseau was led down the stairwell, his wrists bound, his expression defiant. He looked less like a monster than a man inconvenienced, his dark hair unkempt, his lips curling into a smirk. Detective Luc Moreau watched from the car, his jaw tight. He had seen men like this before, artists in their own twisted narratives, convinced the world revolved around them. In the interrogation room, Étienne sat with an elegance that felt rehearsed, like a portrait. He leaned back in the metal chair, arms loose despite the cuffs. Moreau sat across from him, files stacked high, Claire's journal resting at the top like a silent witness. "Do you know why you're here?" Moreau asked. Étienne's mouth curved. "You think I killed her, but you're mistaken." Moreau flipped open the journal, his voice calm. "Claire wrote about you, about the fear, about your control." "She was fragile," Étienne interrupted smoothly. "Romantic, dramatic. Americans often are." She exaggerated. Perhaps she even harmed herself. The word scraped across Moreau's nerves. He leaned forward, his voice steady but sharp. "She didn't put herself in a suitcase, Rousseau." For the first time, a flicker of annoyance crossed Étienne's face, but it vanished quickly. "You're trying to paint me as a villain. But I loved her. She couldn't handle it." Hours passed. Moreau circled him with questions. Where had he been the night she died? Why did her passport sit in his drawer? How did Mark know she was afraid of him? Étienne parried every accusation with a carefully spun lie. "She wanted me to keep the passport safe. Mark was infatuated with her, jealous of me. That night, I painted until dawn." Each answer sounded polished, as though he had practiced them. But then Camille Duval entered. Her presence was like a crack of thunder. She was tall, composed, her eyes cold as steel. She sat across from Étienne without flinching. "You told them I was obsessed," she said, her voice steady. "But they should know the truth. You did to her what you did to me." Étienne's smirk faltered. "Camille, don't." "You locked me in that studio once," she continued, ignoring him. "You screamed when I tried to leave. You broke a glass against the wall, and I thought you would kill me." Moreau watched Étienne carefully, his hands clenched in his cuffs, the mask slipping. "She escaped," Camille said softly, her voice trembling now. "Claire didn't." Étienne turned on her, venom lacing his words. "You always wanted to destroy me. Jealous. Bitter." Camille didn't look away. No, Étienne, I survived you. That's all. The room thickened with silence. Étienne leaned back again, forcing his calm, but sweat glistened at his temple. Moreau pressed. We have your history. We have Claire's words. We have Camille's testimony. You can end the charade now. Confess. Étienne's gaze locked with Moreau's, unblinking, predatory. I will confess nothing. You want a monster? Create one. That's what you do, isn't it, detective? You make stories. But I lived. I loved. And I will not play your role. His words were chilling, calculated to sound noble, but Moreau saw the cracks. The arrogance was defense, the denial armor. Hours later, the interrogation ended. Étienne was led back to his cell, still silent, still unbroken. Moreau remained in the dim room, staring at the journal. The confession hadn't come, but the truth was bleeding in from every angle. Camille's testimony had stripped away Étienne's facade. Now, it was only a matter of time. Emily's voice echoed in his memory. Make him answer for what he did to her. He struck a match, lit another cigarette, and muttered to himself, Oh, he will. One way or another. Beyond the station walls, Paris carried on, but the whispers of Claire Morgan refused to be silenced. The courtroom was crowded, a sea of tense faces lit by the pale light filtering through tall, arched windows. Outside, Paris moved as it always had. Traffic circling the place Dauphine, lovers walking along the Seine, but inside, time slowed. The trial of Étienne Rousseau had begun. Detective Moreau sat near the front, his hands clasped tightly together. He had pursued many cases, but none that felt so personal. Claire Morgan's name had woven itself into the city's consciousness, whispered in cafes, and printed across headlines. Now, everyone waited to hear how her story would finally end. Étienne entered with the same infuriating composure he had carried through interrogation. Even in prison grays, he looked like a man performing for an audience. He adjusted his cuffs as though they were cufflinks, lifted his chin, and surveyed the room with quiet disdain. The prosecution began with methodical precision, piecing together testimony, fragment of evidence, and Camille's devastating account. Each detail formed a mosaic of control and violence. Camille's voice did not waver as she described the fear he had planted in her, the isolation, the moments when his temper had broken through the artist's charm. But it was Emily Morgan who silenced the room. She had flown across the ocean for this day, her grief pressed into the lines of her face, her determination hardening her posture. When she took the stand, she carried Claire's journal with both hands, as if it were fragile glass. Her voice quivered at first. This is my sister's handwriting. These are her final words. She opened to the last entry. The ink slanted, the phrases unfinished. I want to believe in him, but fear keeps growing. Paris was supposed to be a dream. Instead, I feel watched, trapped. If anything happens to me, let it be known, I loved and it destroyed me. Emily paused, her throat tight, her eyes fixed on the page as if Claire's hand still lingered there. She wanted to be an artist's muse, but he turned her into his prisoner. This is what love cost her. The courtroom held its breath. Even the judge's gavel seemed unnecessary. Silence fell naturally, heavy and unbreakable. For the first time, Étienne's facade cracked. His jaw tightened. His fingers tapped against the table in small, nervous bursts. But he refused to look at Emily. The defense attempted to counter, suggesting Claire had been unstable, prone to exaggeration, but their arguments dissolved in the face of the journal's raw truth. No cross-examination could erase the ink she had left behind. Closing statements echoed like thunder. The prosecution painted Étienne not as a tortured genius, but as a manipulator who fed on devotion and left ruin in his wake. The defense leaned on his reputation, his supposed brilliance. Yet when the jury disappeared into deliberation, the weight of evidence had already decided. It took only 3 hours. The foreman rose, voice steady. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree. The room erupted in a wave of emotion, relief, tears, quiet sobs. Emily closed her eyes and pressed the journal to her chest. Moreau exhaled, shoulders finally dropping as though he had been holding his breath for weeks. The judge's sentence followed swiftly. Étienne Rousseau, for the murder of Claire Morgan, you are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the first time, Étienne's expression slipped into something raw. Rage, disbelief, the recognition that his stage was gone. He shouted once, a fractured protest, before guards restrained him and led him away. His voice echoed briefly in the hall before vanishing like smoke. Emily remained seated, trembling but resolute. She had read her sister's last words into the record. Claire's voice had not been silenced after all. When the crowd dispersed, Moreau stepped outside into the crisp Paris air. The bells of Notre Dame tolled faintly across the Seine, a reminder that life in the city went on, indifferent yet eternal. He lit a cigarette, watching the smoke drift upward, and thought of Claire, the girl who had come chasing light, only to find darkness. The narration closed not with triumph, but with reckoning. Love could inspire, but it could also consume. Claire had ignored the warnings. The small fractures had hinted at danger, until the fractures became a shattering. The price of that blindness was final. In the end, Paris will remember her not for the painting she never made, but for the image no one could forget. A suitcase left in shadows, holding the remains of a dream. And as the city's lights flickered on, the story was not entirely over. Justice had been delivered, but memory lingered, whispering what had been lost, and what it truly meant to love in a city that promised beauty, yet so often masked tragedy.